I feel like this can be a gigantic discussion. I'm going to try not to make it too crazy long, but I did want to touch on this because I feel like this is something that is very, very, very relevant for any dance teacher to consider when it comes to what we're giving our kids and what we're expecting from our kids. So the phrase is learned helplessness, right? And learned helplessness is essentially what a child or a person of any age, it's a state of mind they get into where they repeatedly experience, something negative or a failure at a situation, um, and it shifts their ability or their need or their interest to do better at a situation. And when I first heard this, and when I first was kind of listening to what this actually meant, the first thing I thought of were like the students that I have that are just, they just give up so easily. And 20 years ago when I taught, I had kids like that, but they were in the minority. Nowadays, not that they're a total majority, but they're far more frequent in a classroom that I'll come into, especially if there's a certain kind of culture around how we learn. So why am I talking about this? I'm a dance teacher. I'm not, the concept of diagnosing, being I'm not a psychologist. This is something that's beyond my normal talking points, but I think it's something that we as dance teachers can really dive into and start to think about, because when we do things as dance teachers, we are going to help or hurt the concept of learned helplessness, because we're part of a student or a dancer's journey toward taking care of things for themselves or growth, just general growth. So, how does this happen, right? How does a dancer end up feeling learned helplessness? Well, in our situations, it's repeated failure, it's receiving negative feedback, it's sometimes even when we overdo it with the help, when we're giving too much help, and unrealistic expectations. So I'm gonna relate this to hip hop mostly, but this does pertain to dance teachers in general. In hip hop dance class, typical hip hop dance classes that I see all around the country, so many of these experiences are really based around natural ability, what you already know, and a lot of it comes from foundations in other styles. So, for example, a lot of hip hop classes might really lean into techniques that have nothing to do with hip hop, but are being used in there anyway. So dancers get really used to this system where the movement is going to look like this, and it's going to borrow this, and this is how it feels. And then ultimately, and this happens everywhere, kids are going to determine either they totally do hip hop or they totally do not do hip hop. Now, in my longer experiences working with dancers, some of my strongest students are ones who, when I first entered the studio and created the hip hop program or revamped the hip hop program, they were not people who would want to join it because they had this understanding about hip hop that I'm not good at it. So even if it's innocent, you're talking about some kid who's amazing at ballet or tap or jazz or anything like that, and they just, so their mindset is more like shifted towards, well, I'm good at this. They're not really thinking, oh, I can't do hip hop. And even though we can concentrate on, well, their strengths are here, that's still a learned helplessness. You know what I mean? That's still a thing that dancers are putting in their mind that, well, I'm not going to be good at it. And the question in hip hop education is why? Why would you have this mindset that you can't do it? And the mindset that you can't do it in hip hop comes from the fact that usually it's a choreography experience. It's a combo of the week experience. And it's leaning into certain techniques and it doesn't grow from there. Now, this doesn't happen everywhere, but this leads to the question, what can we do to make hip hop feel educational so that, any dancer feels like they can enter it and begin doing it? If I want to take an art class, if I want to learn how to, create comic books, I know today I can't draw comic book characters, but I'm not going to avoid class because I don't know how to draw comic characters. That's literally why you take class. If you go to college for whatever, for anything, you're doing it to learn how to be that thing, right? So then there's the difference between the dancer who's interested in the style and not interested, and that's valid. But I come across a lot of dancers who are like, I'd love to do it, I'm just bad at it. Right? So again, learned helplessness. They just feel it's unattainable. They feel it's something that they're not able to do. And then once you're in the classroom, I've seen it happen a lot too, where the one with the natural talent gets praise, and that's it, and that's good, and everybody else becomes kind of like the backup dancer. So that, for me, falls into the line of negative feedback. You just learn to be the background dancer, or you learn that you're not going to be in the front or get bigger opportunities because you're not that person with those skills. And as teachers, we should really be leaning into the idea that we can create the superstar out of any of these dancers if they're passionate. That's my belief. I believe that, if you take someone who's truly passionate, you can guide them through it. And I've spoken to many people who have these amazing dancers. I was just talking to a friend a few weeks ago, where I was able to see some of his dancers, and he was mentioning that exact thing to me. I'm like, oh, that one was really good, and his response was that one struggled a lot in the beginning. We had to form this from the ground up, and guess what? They did. So, making sure we don't sleep on anyone who's passionate is a big thing, right? So how can we help with dancers who are experiencing something like this? Part of it is celebrating small wins, which is something I say a lot in my educational programs. Finding reward, whatever that reward is, and making sure that we can kind of balance that. We celebrate it without losing the concept that we need to keep growing too, right? So okay, that was awesome. That's actually what it's supposed to look like. That's supposed to feel that way, whatever that is. And so, okay, awesome. Now we're here. Now we've built a little bit. I have dancers who were diving into brand new styles of movement that they've never done before, who are now competing with it, and they get that little reinforcement when they get praise at competition for it. So that's one easy one. If you can get them there at a dance competition, you show them success with it. But they're not always going to score well. So what can you do in the classroom? And that's really important. But I think what's most important is that we create a safe space for them to fail, right? And I lean into this phrase that I use a lot called discovery mode. And discovery mode in my classroom means do not try to impress me. It means we're just playing, and the intention isn't to create the best thing ever. It's to just find things. I always lean into this thing where years ago, when I was in middle school, I was invited to do this gifted and talented program, and the way they tested you, they did a bunch of things for tests, but one of the tests was, you have 3 minutes, draw as many different pictures as you could. And instead of drawing as many pictures as I could, I drew a few really nice pictures. I just loved to draw, so I would just like mess with it a little bit. I was good for a 10-year-old, I guess, but obviously, like I said before with the comic thing, I'm not this amazing artist, but I like to draw. So I was really focusing on just the couple of things, and I was trying to make it perfect instead of finding the abundance. So at the time, it was confusing to me, but as a teacher now, I kind of get it, because if you're asking someone to be in a certain mode, that mode might be think, create, just put stuff out there. And that's something I wasn't allowing my brain to do. So something we want to encourage in our dancers is the point isn't to make something perfect for me right now. The point is to just explore and to find. And when you do something that isn't good, or when you do something that is unrefined, unpolished, it should feel like a learning opportunity. It shouldn't feel like it's proof of incompetence. So that's part of it. Making sure that kids are allowed to struggle, and that it's a good thing to struggle, and that it feels like something that they're supposed to do in order to get better. I'm big on this idea that, especially in this day and age, a lot of young people are being taught that if you're uncomfortable, someone is wrong. And the problem with that is discomfort is growth, and discomfort is healthy. Obviously, there are ways, there are outdated concepts for teaching, and there are ways people can make people feel uncomfortable that are totally wrong. But distinguishing is really important, because if we don't distinguish, everybody just feels, well, if I'm uncomfortable, you're wrong. For example, I've watched kids, approach teachers after a dress rehearsal and say, oh, it makes me uncomfortable when you give me corrections on stage. So this dancer wanted to exempt themselves from corrections, which means they're exempting themselves from growth. I had a group of college dancers openly complain to me about some of their teachers that they've experienced, and I'd say, from my perspective at least, 20% of what they said was valid. I was like, okay, I hear you. That sounds a little unfair. But the other 80% was common stuff that they're just not ready for. And my response to them was, this dance world has to function, and it can't function on your preferences. It can't function on your entitlements. It can't function on your comforts. And if you think it's supposed to be comfortable, if we tried for the dance world to exist on that plane, it would destroy itself. It can't function on that, even if it wanted to. So it's more important that we as teachers learn to push dancers into that, that place of discomfort, um, where they feel it's a learning opportunity, and they feel it's a place to grow. So when we get back into this concept of learned helplessness, it's such a huge issue today because it comes from so many angles. The baseline, your baseline students already probably lean on their cell phones, their smartphones, their access to information. So things are already easy, instant gratification. So they already have such an easy time getting certain things that they want, getting certain bits of information that they want. So their mindset is already primed for, well, it's supposed to be easy. So when you as a dance teacher, and like I said before, I'm really leaning into the hip hop part of it about this. When you as the hip hop teacher teach kids that everything that they do is just a remix of the same stuff that they know already, when it's just a social experience where it's just supposed to be trendy and TikTok dances and all this other stuff, it's not going to bode well for them as a dancer, and it's not going to help them train. It's not going to help them get into a training mentality. So I'm finding less and less dancers who are really willing to do what it takes. I'm finding lots of dancers who are like coming in with this, well, I'm uncomfortable, so it has to be wrong mindset, and it doesn't help. So as hip hop teachers, we need to make sure that we're setting the standard that class is growth and class is change and evolution, and it should feel different and it should feel challenging. And the moment it stops getting challenging for a second, if it's like, challenging just in time for recital, and it kind of tapers off and you feel good and confident when you get on stage, that's the magic feeling, is that we get this challenge, and then it gets easier as we get into the spring and get close to a recital or whenever your performance time is. And then we get to seal that. Okay, we successfully performed that thing that felt challenging and got easy. But now that's our new standard. That's our new baseline. So what are we going to do next? When you come into the classroom next, how am I, as your teacher, going to challenge you next? How am I going to make it harder? And so much of this world is about leaning into, presentation of things, so competition is really, competition groups are really guilty of this. I appreciate any competition team that is reflecting growth rather than the same stuff over. And I've dealt with studios who are really just trying to win, and they're sacrificing education for a trophy, right? So we don't want to sacrifice education for a trophy. I mean, the way it should be is that you go to competition and you show that next level that you're getting to, and you're going to get judged on that. If you're just going for the trophy, you're going for that award, and you're sacrificing everything a kid can be. And we're creating learned helplessness, because then they're stagnant. I've worked with kids like that. I've used this example a lot, where I worked with a kid right after she won, platinum, whatever version of the top score was at that competition. She got it for her solo. But the truth was, and if you understand hip hop, you understand what the problem is here. That girl did not know how to groove. She had no groove. But it didn't matter, because she was already in this reward system for doing something that wasn't really hip hop. So she was comfortable just sticking with what she had, so that when I come in and make her feel like a beginner, she doesn't like it. She's not comfortable with it. She's not happy with it. She's like, well, I want to do the other stuff. And that's kind of the inherent problem here, and the way we create a learned helplessness, even if we don't see it like that on the surface. Because if you're thinking about this concept, or if you've heard this phrase before, learned helplessness feels like I have a student who just thinks they're bad. But I don't think it's just that. That's why I'm making this video. I don't think it's just a dancer who doesn't feel like they can dance well. I think it's people who lean on things that they're good at, so that they don't have to focus on or face the things that they're bad at. And we get that a lot. So I think that we're also creating, as teachers, we're creating a learned helplessness if we're allowing our dancers to, pick a version of what's more comfortable and happier and feels good and all that other stuff. So if you're giving your dancers, the movement that they're comfortable with at 14, and that's exactly how they're dancing until they're 18, we're creating learned helplessness. We're creating this false mentality that will not help them in college programs. It will not help them if they want to be choreographers and teachers themselves. And it will not help them in anything that they want to pursue. So, for the sake of our students and whatever futures they have, we as teachers need to make sure that we continue to push the idea that you can get better, that discomfort is a good thing, and that being a student and being a beginner is a good thing, and that we all do that. We all go through that. You know, I'll be 39 soon. I still need to feel like a beginner sometimes in order to get better creatively or to get better technically. And the people that I learned from, who are in their 50s and 60s, they still want to get better. So we don't want to lose that with this generation. And I fear that we get close to losing that, or at least losing the abundance of dancers who can come out with that. I'm not saying all these kids are like this, but we must recognize that so many kids are having trouble with this now. A lot of it comes from their own access to information. They're very used to having whatever they have quickly. But as hip hop teachers in particular, and dance teachers in other styles, when we're offering them something they're already used to, you know, when they're offering them that easy experience or the remix of the thing that they've already done, we're creating a problem in terms of their willingness to grow. Because then when I come in and teach a class and kids are expecting it to be the music they like and the movement they like and all that other stuff, and I come in and I say, guess what, you're going to train, I look like the bad guy for wanting to train them. I've seen kids get frustrated and uncomfortable with the basic concept of training. Even if I come in, I'm a generally happy teacher. Even if I come in with a big smile on my face and say, yeah, we're going to train. It's okay. You don't have to look great today. They don't want to hear it because that's not what they're signing up for. So we need to make sure that we can establish what they're actually signing up for. And it does create problems. It creates friction when there are choices like that. You know, if a kid is prone to settling into this learned helplessness mindset, and in room one, there's a hip hop teacher who is going to make you feel like a beginner so that you can grow. And in room two, there's a hip hop teacher who's just going to teach you a combo featuring that stuff that you like to the music you like. You're going to go into the comfortable room because not only are you unable to do the stuff in there, but you don't want to feel that experience. So as teachers, we need to help dancers embrace that experience as something exciting. You know, I am finding it less and less. You know, there used to be a high frequency of kids who they'd come into the room and they would, you know, experience a move that they couldn't do, and it would like they'd go, oh, I have to get that, and they'd just like keep going, keep diving into it, and they'd fall, you know, whatever, embarrass themselves, laugh it off, and try it again. Now, it's definitely in the minority. You know, I find it in certain places, but there are so many instances where kids aren't really wanting to do that. You know, and it can be infectious. You know, one kid sits out, I can't do that. And that stuff drives me nuts. As a teacher, I don't like it. I don't, you know, like I said, I'm a very kind teacher. I'm a very patient teacher. But when somebody just resigns themselves, that drives me nuts. And that's something that I'll address immediately because I'm here to teach you. So, you know, and I'm as a teacher, and I'm sure you are too. Many of us are ready for that. A kid who's gonna appear lazy, even if they're not really lazy. I like to use that phrase lazy. I like to use the word lazy lightly because not every kid who's doing that is lazy. They're just really uncomfortable, and they're not learning to feel that and to be okay with that. So they're just like, okay, I can't do it, so I'm not going to do it. So it does get frustrating regardless. But not all of these kids are lazy. Some are. But not all these kids are lazy. Some of these kids are just very used to a system where they just don't have to if they're not good at it. Oh, you're not good at it? Okay. Do the other thing. But we want to rework that. As dance teachers, we have such a great opportunity to fix that because dance cannot lean into entitlements and the seeking of comfort on the level that many students nowadays want to seek. So, learned helplessness. This concept that you're resigning yourself from doing better because you just feel that you can't. And us as dance teachers, we as dance teachers have this opportunity to help dancers stay away from that because we have an atmosphere that doesn't function well on leaning into that mentality. And if we're not careful, the majority of people who take on these roles when we retire are going to have that, and it's going to water down what we do. So that's the big thing that I want to try to avoid.